Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Calm and Colors. Before I begin painting, I like to take a moment in my studio collecting my thoughts, organizing my tools, cleaning and preparing, checking my materials, and so on. This time I use to quickly disconnect myself from the chaos and noise that is the general world outside these days. I've developed my process through a couple decades worth of trial and error, one where I prepare each and every painting with a strong foundation from which later layers can build upon. As I apply the paint to the canvas, although I do think about these later layers, I'm mostly instilling a sense of calm in myself, a sense of peace, as that translates to the art. The idea of applying this initial heavy body acrylic is to make some form of barrier, such that the liquid layers in the future will remain mostly on the face of the canvas and simply not splash off. As I have created these paintings over the years, I have actually learned a thing or two, a bunch of do's and do nots. And for those of you playing the home game, I've learned that when you place heavy body acrylic onto a canvas, you need to do so on a mostly dry surface, or else you will have considerable difficulty getting it to work as intended. I've also noticed that working with liquid acrylics tends to be a lot easier for my own applications and needs, and the practice of such makes up a lot of my process. As a whole, I would say that I'm harnessing chaos. I am working with cats, if you will. Colorful cats, cats in tiny, labeled, expensive bottles, but cats nonetheless. When I start using a color, there is usually no rhyme or reason about it. It's completely arbitrary. It is out of the ether of my mind. There are some days you wake up and everything is just blue. Your clothes are blue. You see cars on the street, all blue. Your bills as they pile up in a corner are also, as you guessed it, blue. But the idea here is once a color is chosen, I will go about finding the harmony with other colors to build this abstract landscape, as people often describe my work to me, creating my 2D and 3D new world of color. A lot of what I do is sitting in the quiet with my work, trying to think through it in my head, not thinking at all, or just watching newly applied layers progress as naturally as possible. I tend to work at night because that is when things are, by and large, much more quiet in my neighborhood. That said, I should apologize in advance for any particular Brooklyn sound that may seep through. I have a very modest setup here, and living in a pre war building does have its charm. I'm finding myself attracted to earth tones at this point. The challenge is to find the middle ground where I can blend things with such a deft touch that everything disappears one into the other. Sometimes I'll have to redo a layer, restart it if you will, because it doesn't settle exactly right. There are 1,000 different variables as I work, all of which can be completely different from one day to the next. New York has this interesting aspect to its weather, whereby one day it can be the Sahara Desert in dryness, and then the next it can be the Amazon rainforest, as every surface of the apartment becomes alarmingly moist. As such, I try to mitigate things with opening or closing windows, blasting the air conditioning, or some amateur voodoo spells if all else fails. Nonetheless, it is very hard to work with chaos. Chaos doesn't tend to listen. It speaks a different language, and it's either itchy or angry, sometimes both. Because of chaos, the outcome from blending the same colors in the same way can be completely different from one application to the next, but I suppose at least it keeps things interesting. I don't often like to use yellow. I suppose everyone has their favorite two or three colors, and yellow isn't even on my top 75. But, as the idea in this layer is to evoke some form of contrast and framing of the 3D texture around it, I'm working with it nonetheless, just spraying it ever softly, spreading it with one of my high pressurized sprayers. Sometimes you just need a bright color to punctuate the darkness. Green is not a favorite color either, but unlike yellow, it does make it to my top 75. For whatever reason, I do gravitate to a good, stern teal. I like to mix it with a darker turquoise, and sometimes I'll add in a blue just to appease my friend Chaos, and in this particular case, create the perfect color of tropical water, somewhere far from here and warmly kissed by the sun. Changing hues, I'm adding a little bit of red mixed direct from its tube. When I cannot squeeze any more paint from a tube, I will fill it up with water, give it a tremendous shake, and create my own custom form of fluid liquid acrylic, sometimes adding in a bit of different color or medium. The end result is something similar to my golden fluid acrylics that I've used predominantly throughout the rest of this work. I can create many of my own blends in this manner, with specific unique viscosities that all have different characteristics. You'll notice that I'm focusing on one specific area over and over again. Sometimes I can put down 50 layers in the same spot until things are just right, and sometimes it just takes one purple and one fork. There are several points later in the process where I will pick up the canvas and inspect it and see how the light plays with it. I tend to keep the artist lamp in my studio that hangs directly over my work area, a neutral albeit slightly warm hue. I'll also take my work outside into the sun and look it over, noticing areas that still need touch ups or complete overhauls. The tropical blue blends again take center stage, and maybe it's just my desire to go on a vacation somewhere that isn't made of concrete and poison and general bad attitudes. But I enjoy this blend immensely, and it helps punctuate the long, unbroken gray winter skies outside. As we're coming to the end, I start going through an army of touch ups, little areas of intense, concentrated visual interest that I take great care to make as inconspicuous as possible, so they only stand out in certain lights. As my desire is to create a composition that is as cohesive and looks naturally made as possible, I will adopt unconventional means to do so. In this case, I take the paint tube itself and apply direct portions of this neon fluorescent red in tiny little slivers, almost as if it was dropped or splattered in some incidental way. It's odd because, although I'm much closer to the end of this painting than I am the beginning, this last 2% always seems to take the longest. The only thing left at this point are the finer details, the tiny little almost nothings that I suppose would go missed if I didn't point them out directly. I made a decision a long time ago, with the options being finish the sides in a single color, or let the sides of the canvas become part of the painting itself. The second option won. I like to have an infinite plane, whereby what you see on the front has continued on the side, and perhaps beyond that in your imagination. Sticking to the idea of the painting forming an abstract landscape, I also want the overall viewing experience to be very organic and natural. To achieve this, I will grab the old trusty fan brush, like another famous artist used to say, and work on continuing the various paints and textures onto the sides. Of course, always leaning on perfection, I take this time to see if anything else needs a touch up or a change. Brand new brush. And we'll brand new brush as we remove everything. After I've removed the aforementioned everything, I will take the lacquer and apply a healthy amount in the center. Using as even of a brushstroke as possible, I will start to spread it around such that it covers the entirety of the surface. The idea here is to get as smooth and even of a layer as possible. It serves as both protectant and enhancement for the face of the canvas, allowing details and color that may have otherwise faded to burst through again. I have lived in New York most of my life. The charm, the people, the little neighborhoods and massive differences in culture, all so close together, shoulder to shoulder. It's brilliant to be able to take the subway from one neighborhood to the next, from Brooklyn all the way up to the Upper East Side where my old apartment sits next to Carl Schurz Park. Here, I used to spend my days walking by the East River, people watching, admiring boats, staring off into the sky, or looking out over Roosevelt Island. It's a totally different energy from this neighborhood to where I live now. Next, visiting the Metropolitan Museum of Art, my church, the place where I spent many, many hours. I used to go on my birthday and sit amongst the art, drawing and sketching, taking it all in. There's a certain magic there that I can't quite describe, but I always enjoy each and every time I go back. Now, making my way to Central Park, the giant boulders, the people all in their leisure, and yes, the distant New York sound of sirens and quickly moving craziness. Here, at the end of Brooklyn, with Brighton Beach, a place where I've spent a good deal of time with my family watching the waves. Not so long ago, I used to work on 42nd Street, close to Times Square, at a horrible bank with a lot of broken people. At night, I would come home by the Brooklyn Bridge and remember watching all the lights of the city fade behind me like a scatter of whispers. And last, to Kelly Park, close to my home where I've watched my boys grow up and the park itself being made new only a year ago. These are some of the places of my New York and the pieces of me that I, in turn, place into my art. This is the city that I have loved for all of these years and that has made me, for better or for worse. Finally, we arrive in my studio again, where everything began. After 14 months, over 300 layers, 600 hours of video, a dozen life catastrophes, and so much more, I aptly named my painting Aeon, and it is finished. I want to thank you for going along on this journey with me. Hopefully, it has brought you a bit of peace, a certain amount of entertainment, and maybe even a little bit of inspiration. This may be the first, but it most certainly will not be the last. And with that, I want to say thank you for watching Calm and Colors.